Hey everybody, welcome back. My name is Ilse Zamarripa and this is the Worldspace. I can't even describe how excited I am to be speaking to this legend. Why is he so important to me? Because he basically animated the PIXAR films that defined my childhood. Monsters, Inc., Finding Nemo, The Incredibles, Cars, WALL-E, Toy Story 3, Brave, Inside Out, and my beloved Coco. Victor Navone, it's a pleasure to have you in the Worldspace. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your knowledge with us.
Hi Elsa, it's great to be with you, even if it's only virtually. I wish I could be there in person. I wish I could be anywhere in person besides in quarantine, but it's a pleasure to join you. Thanks also for that really nice intro. That's a lot of hype. I will try to live up to it as best I can.
The pleasure is ours. For anyone who doesn't know, Victor got hired at PIXAR in the year 2000, thanks to this wonderful clip. That clip became viral because it's so creative, it's so funny. It makes me wonder, what in your opinion were the biggest challenges of computer animation back then?
Boy, that was a long time ago. It was truly a different era. This was around 1998, 1999 that I was teaching myself computer animation on my spare time. And I didn't have any training in animation, so I was learning as much as I could on my own. I was buying books like The Illusion of Life and whatever books there were on computer animation at the time, which maybe there weren't a lot. There were maybe a handful. And the more important thing that was happening in the late 90s was, obviously there had been Toy Story, which was the first full-length animated, computer-animated feature film. But also the software at the time was becoming affordable to hobbyists and people who just wanted to learn for fun, like myself. Prior to that, if you were to try to buy a version of Maya 1.0, a seat of Maya would cost you over 10 grand. But then I found a piece of software called Hash Animation Master, which ran on a Mac or a PC, and it was only like $200. But there was no YouTube. There weren't a lot of online learning resources at that time, so it was kind of the Wild West of animation.
Let me ask you, out of all the amazing movies you've worked on, what characters have you loved the most?
Oh boy, there are so many, but the ones that rise to the top in my memory would likely be WALL-E, Hector from Coco, and Fear from Inside Out. I think those were my favorite to work with.
WALL-E is one of the best Pixar movies ever made, man. I saw it again 2 days ago, and there are so many impressive things. I was shocked with the fact that the movie, like more than half of the movie, goes by almost without dialogue. That is impressive, right?
Yeah, people often talk about how challenging it must have been to animate these silent characters like WALL-E. And yeah, he's a really limited character. He doesn't have facial expressions. He doesn't even have elbows. So it's a bit of a puzzle to figure out how to emote through that limited body. But I really enjoy those kinds of challenges. And as an animator, I really enjoy animating pantomime scenes. I like not having to rely on the dialogue to tell me the timing or the subtext or the mood of a scene. I can invent more, and I can take more ownership over the performance, which I think is kind of a rarity and a luxury for animators in a film production, a feature film production situation. So working on WALL-E was a really special time for me, and I think for the other animators who worked on that film. The whole first act of that film was completed by 6 or 7 animators working in a very small, tight group over a few months. And the director, Andrew Stanton, gave us a lot of latitude to add our own ideas, add acting ideas, add moments of entertainment, add length, add frames to our shots, make them longer if we felt it could really make the character more endearing or more clear. That's not the kind of freedom that you usually have on a feature film production, so that's another way that WALL-E was special. Yeah, WALL-E was a really fun character to animate for me, for his personality as well. He's so childlike and naive and innocent. He kind of reminds me of like a more sophisticated version of Luxo Jr., just curious and energetic and, wants to know more about his world, wants to know more about Eve, clearly. And so I found I could relate to him pretty easily, and his performance choices became second nature after a while. You know, after I'd gone through a few sequences with him, I felt like I understood the character well enough to anticipate what he would do next. And there are some scenes, like the scene where he wakes up really sleepy in the morning because he hasn't had his solar charge yet. When I was animating that scene, we had just had our second baby, so I had a newborn at home. I wasn't getting a lot of sleep, so I could really relate to the way that Wally felt stumbling around in his own trailer during that scene.
Wow. And you told me you loved animating Fear of Inside Out. He is such an expressive character, right? I really love what you were saying, the intersection between 3D and 2D animation. I feel like in that movie, it's wonderful. You were the animation supervisor for that film. How do you, as a supervisor, explain it to the animators? Like, how do you polish the personality of each character and transmit it to your team?
Good question. So I was co-supervisor on that film with Sean Krause. We teamed up for that one. And this is a challenge on any film, is trying to keep the characters consistent. Because of course, you know, with a crew of 60 or more animators, you're going to have 60 different opinions about who that character is and how they move and the choices they're going to make. Yeah. So it's an ongoing struggle to try to keep that character consistent and feeling like it was only animated by one animator, ideally. But we have a lot of different methods for controlling the quality of characters. For instance, during the pre-production process, when we're building the character along with art and the character rigging department, we create what is called a model sheet, which is just kind of a packet of poses that are what we call on model and in character for that character. So what they should look like, what's appealing for that character, what controls you should use to animate that character versus what controls you should avoid. So it's basically like a how-to user guide for that character. And usually the animator who helps develop that character in production will continue to shepherd that character into production as well. So they become the lead person to go to for questions about that character and how that character should behave and how that character should look. That's not to say that they are the final answer, because the character will always evolve over the course of the production. You really don't know who a character is until they've gone through a few sequences in the film and you can see them in context of the movie. So, you know, a different animator might have a new idea for how to play that character that the director might really respond to. So that new idea becomes part of the lexicon of how we pose this character and who that character is, gets added to the model sheet. We also might create predetermined libraries of like hand shapes and face shapes, just to get the animators started with something that's already on model and appealing. With Fear, the real challenge was he had to be designed specifically for the camera. As soon as you loaded him up in our software in Presto, he was immediately off model, and you had to kind of sculpt his features to make them look right for camera. So he always had to have his nose in profile, his mouth was like a cutout negative space, his eyes would always be slightly stacked on top of each other, and they'd be diagonal depending on which way he turned his head, kind of like the way Mickey Mouse's ears rotate around his head as he turns. Keeping his curlicue hair in silhouette. There were a lot of very particular rules for Fear, for making him feel more like the 2D kind of graphic style that we got from the character design from Chris Sasaki.
I also heard before that Fear was inspired by Mr. Bean's personality. Is that true?
Yeah, I don't remember Mr. Bean being referenced so much as an inspiration for Fear. I don't remember Pete Docter talking about that character in particular. More often, I would hear Pete talking about Don Knotts, the comedic actor from the 60s and 70s. Some of the older viewers might remember him from the Andy Griffith Show. He played the deputy Barney Fife.
It was just terrible. Oh no, he's gonna cry.
Now steady now, Luther. Tell us about it.
It was terrible. It was just terrible. I'll never get over it as long as I live.
Who do you think you are?
Drop dead, that's who. Right, Mr. Beckett? Mr. Beckett? Mr. Beckett? Mr. Beckett?
He was also in a lot of very broad comedies from the 60s and 70s, often where he'd play a very easily frightened character, like the movie The Ghost and Mr. Chicken. He's known for having these sort of wide, bulbous eyes, which lent itself very closely to Fear. So he was an inspiration. I think the Muppet character Beaker was also an inspiration too.
And do you know if it's true that the characters are inspired by shapes? Because I've heard joy is a star, sadness is a teardrop, fear is like a nerve, disgust is broccoli, and anger is a brick. Do you know if that's true?
Well, I think it's the kind of the other way around. Rather than the characters being inspired by those shapes represented a distillation of who those characters were. So the art department, led by Albert Lozano, tried to reduce each of the emotions down to a single color and a shape, which would become kind of the touchstone for that character.
Okay.
So, how do you distill down joy? Well, like a golden star, she's a burst of energy, or, anger is hot like a brick, so he's just this red rectangle. So that was more just a way to simplify and create a statement about their character rather than that being the inspiration for the character.
Okay. And throughout your amazing and very long career, do you have a favorite shot or favorite sequence that you've animated?
Oh wow, that's a tough question, Ilse. A lot of times I look back on my work and I just don't like it. All I see is what I think is wrong with it. But there are a few sequences here and there that stand out in my memory, and I look at those and I'm like, yeah, that's still pretty good. Of course, I like a lot of my work on Wally. Just the freedom of working with that character, and I felt some of my ideas were pretty successful. I really enjoyed working with Hector on Coco. He's just such a fun character, and the scene I got to animate with him trying to bribe the officer into letting him go across the bridge and detaching his hands and doing lots of fun little gags with that was really fun too. I enjoyed that a lot. And I have to say, the work I did on Kitbull was really satisfying for me. It was my first time really animating in 2D. I don't have hand-drawn animation training, so it was kind of back to school for me on that. And, while it's not the most refined animation, it's not on ones, the drawings are pretty loose, the style's pretty rough, but there's a playfulness to that character and those characters in that world and the scenes that I got that was so much fun to animate. It was a real freedom to it, a real freedom of expression, and so I was pretty happy with my work on that film as well.
How was it like to work with Rosanna Sullivan?
Yeah, everything about that project, working on that project, was a real joy. I love stories about animals. I'm actually not much of a cat person, but animating a cat, in this case a spastic little kitten, was really fun. Working with Rosanna was really fun. She's a great storyteller and such a sweet person, but also with a really clear artistic vision. And also just working in a small team. I think we only had like 6 or 7 animators. Wow. Anytime you're working on a small team like that, it becomes very collaborative, and everybody has a real sense of ownership over the final product because we're all contributing so much to it as a percentage, if nothing else. So it was really fun. I felt like a young animator again because I was learning a medium that I hadn't really tried before, 2D animation. We were animating in TV Paint, which is a pretty cool program, and we got to do everything from rough animation all the way to cleanup in color. Wow. Which is pretty cool to be involved in that through the entire pipeline. We didn't do the final compositing on the backgrounds. That was done in After Effects by Andy Jimenez. But as animators, we got to do pretty much everything else as far as the animation side. So a really enjoyable experience overall, and I would do it again in a heartbeat.
And I feel like it's proof that you don't need a huge and intense production with a lot of complex elements when you have a strong story. Like, the story tells itself, and you can create amazing art with just a very simple style. I loved it. You told me before you loved working with the director Domichi. I also had the honor of meeting her a few years back. She is lovely. She is very, very talented and very young. Wow. How was your experience like working with her?
Yeah, that's another example of just a really wonderful experience. Again, working on shorts is so great because they're this small, intimate team. Working with Domi's amazing. Like you said, she's very young, but she has such a mature sense of storytelling. And she's very confident in her ideas, but very easy to work with, and such a clear and unique vision. Which is another great thing about the short films, is you get to try different kinds of storytelling and different kinds of character design. which was definitely the case in Bao. I got to learn a lot about Chinese culture, or in this case, Chinese Canadian culture. We got to work with very different character designs than we'd ever explored before, so we had to figure out a lot of new rules for that. And, you know, playing with the dumpling, who's so cute, and figuring out the transformation sequence for him was really fun. I got to be involved in the pre-production and the animation of that, so that was really satisfying. Yeah, and overall, I'm really proud of that film. And again, short films are such a nice break after, you know, the behemoth of working on a feature film, which are also great, but sometimes, you know, you feel like I'm just one out of 200 people, you know, am I really making a difference? But working on a short film is really fun, especially when it's something as unique and refreshing as Bao.
Yeah, I can imagine. And speaking of bold characters and wonderful choices, let's talk about Hector. Like, how did you shoot reference, and how did the rig work? Because you have so many like detachable pieces, it's insane.
Yeah, working with Hector was really fun. Did I shoot video reference? Sometimes. For the scene where he's trying to bribe the guard, I did shoot some reference of myself for that, just kind of sitting down, because he has to deal with like the prop of the hat and he's leaning on the desk, and I just kind of wanted to figure out some of the basic physicality of that scene, but I didn't want to be limited to just what I can do with my own body. So I relied, for Hector, I relied a lot more on just drawing thumbnails. I actually sketch blocked out that scene and 2D, you know, blocked it over the layout, just for quick experimentation and to really, you know, get broad with the performance and push the shapes. Same thing with the scene of Hector riding on the gondola with Miguel, and he's kind of playing guitar. And talking to Miguel, that was all blocked using sketch thumbnails and then 2D blocked, 2D hand-drawn blocked in the scene. So sometimes I like to use video reference. For Hector, I found it to be less useful because I wanted him to be broader than I can be, and I just wanted him to be really appealing to look at and just try to get really fun, exaggerated poses out of him. He's definitely a fun character. And the scene of him trying to bribe the guard, the officer, is also one of my favorites because it's Hector pretending to be something else. So I love scenes where you get to see a character actually performing. Wow. You know, whether they're lying or whether they're performing, you know, as a part of a play, or they're just trying to deceive another character. I really enjoy acting scenes like that. Yes, it was a complex rig. He's composed of, you know, 100 or so bones, all of which can be detached from his body and parented or constrained to something else, animated separately, however you want to. However ambitious the animator wanted to be, yes, he or she could completely disassemble the entire rig if they wanted to. Luckily, I didn't have to do that. I only had to detach a hand here or there, so it wasn't too bad. But the technology was definitely there to let the animators have complete freedom over each individual bone in Hector's body if they wanted to.
Oh, okay. And speaking about this technical aspect, how was it like to animate Lou? How was that rig structured? Was it kind of similar to Hector's? Because it like changes body parts.
Well, it was a similar principle between Lou and Hector, but very different in execution. Of course, working on Lou, it was just, you know, it was a short film, much smaller budget, much smaller team, so we didn't have the same resources as a feature film like Coco. And also, Hector was designed from the beginning with a rig that allowed the bones to detach and, you know, be very robust in that way. With Lou, the character design actually changed a bit in the course of production, so we had to throw out some animation and go back to the drawing board for a little bit for his character design.
Okay.
Originally, he would change shape less. He was mostly just the hoodie with a pair of eyes on top, and they became worried early on in the production that he looked too much like a Muppet, so we kind of redesigned him to be more haphazard, to look a little bit more janky, and we decided that as long as the eyes stayed together in a readable place where the audience could know what Lou was thinking and feeling, the rest of his design was kind of up in the air, and we could change it in every scene depending on what Lou needed to do, which I think was a really genius idea for storytelling and entertainment, but a really difficult idea to execute for the animation team. On one side, All the animators got to contribute ideas for different configurations of Lou. We would take, the 2 balls for the eyes and the hoodie, and then all the other props that he was assembled from. I think we had like 12 different props that we could use, and we would just experiment with different ways to combine those into new character designs.
Wow.
And so Lou could be radically different from one shot to the next. But then it was up to us to figure out how to animate those transitions and create those on-the-fly rigs for all the motion that Lou needed to do,
Wow.
which is a real challenge. And I like to think of myself as a pretty technical animator, and I don't normally get overwhelmed by those kind of things. But animating some of those shots really brought me to my knees as an animator, and I had to take a lot more breaks and walk away from the computer on that film than I normally would. It was still a really enjoyable film to work on. I love the people, I love the story, and I'm really proud of what we accomplished. But boy, it was hard work.
Have you ever felt intimidated by the level of complexity of a shot? Like, you receive it and you're like, how am I gonna do this?
Absolutely. Many of the shots I animated on Lou were exactly that. Not only was there the complexity of the character, coming up with a design for my shots, and then doing all the constraints and attaches, and then figuring out how to transform into the next version of Lou. But also in some cases there were moving cameras and both characters are running and they're having a tug of war with a backpack. I mean, that's like all the hardest things in animation to do. So that was a real challenge, and it made me think back to one of the earliest challenges of my career at PIXAR, which was working on Incredibles 1. I had this sequence of where Buddy, who becomes Syndrome, Buddy jumps out the window and is flying around, and he's got a bomb attached to his cape. And so Mr. Incredible grabs the cape, and the 2 of them are flying through the city. Mr. Incredible's trying to pull the bomb off the cape, and Buddy's trying to shake him loose. And it's just total chaos, and I had no point of reference for that. I certainly couldn't shoot reference. It was, a moving camera, flying characters, with a complex action and complex constraints set up at the same time. Mm-hmm. It took me a long time to get those shots approved, and bless Brad Bird for his patience with me, because my early iterations on those shots I think were really just way off the mark and not nearly energetic enough. But he worked with me. I think it took 3 or 4 passes before we really found it. But I was really glad to have that opportunity to figure that stuff out and gain that confidence, and to have leadership that was patient with me and willing to work with me to grow and learn how to do those kinds of shots.
My favorite movie director when it comes to PIXAR has always been Brad Bird. He is a true genius. How has it been like to work with him in The Incredibles and in Ratatouille? What are the things you have learned from him?
Yeah, working with Brad is kind of an animator's dream, and I was very lucky to do it early in my career at PIXAR on Incredibles 1. Anytime we would go to dailies with him, it was like going to animation school, or film school for that matter, because Brad has a really deep knowledge of cinema in general, not just animated films, but live action films. He can talk about real camera lenses and light and cinematography and all that stuff. So he brings a huge wealth of knowledge to the table. And it was a real pleasure for me to learn from him in dailies. I remember sitting in dailies with him, and he would go over my shots and other people's, and that was the first time I really understood what spacing meant in computer animation. And just the concept that it really doesn't matter that we're working with 3-dimensional characters in a 3-dimensional virtual space. The audience at the end of the day only sees a 2-dimensional image up on screen, so it's up to us to make sure that that image reads as clearly as possible, and that the timing and the spacing and the arcs and the silhouettes and all that are as graphic and readable as possible to really maximize the appeal and the readability. So that was just one of the many lessons I took away from working with Brad. He also worked with me on a scene in The Incredibles where Dash does a take, just reacting to something. And I remember him coming to my desk and kind of working over my shoulder and talking me through like how to do the squash and stretch and the timing and the overshoot and all that stuff. It's still techniques that I use to this day, and techniques that I try to share with my students, pass on the knowledge. I didn't get to work officially on Ratatouille. I did one shot kind of under the table just to help out, and because I wanted to work with Brad again. And same thing on Incredibles 2. I just did one quick throwaway shot just to, because who knows if we'll ever get to work with Brad again, if he's off to do live action or something else. So if you have the opportunity to work with him as an animator or as just a creative, you definitely want to take that opportunity.
Wow, and I have always loved this sequence that you animated for The Incredibles. How did you solve the camera with the action? Would you mind guiding us with as much detail as possible through your process?
It was really kind of a dance between me as an animator and the layout department, who's in charge of camera. But that was a scene that we did some previs on. So before the shot was officially released to animation, they asked me to do a quick, just rough timing pass on Dash, moving back and forth through the tunnel, just with the basic timing that I thought would be appropriate for the shot. Nothing else, no facial expressions or anything, just, animating the root controls. And then we'd show that to Brad, to get Brad's buy-off on it, and then the camera person would kind of follow my blocking. And then if there was any adjustments I needed to make for the camera, I would do that. So it would be back and forth. Mm-hmm. And then once that shot went into production, I got to keep animating on that shot, which was great because I was just kind of building on top of my own previs animation. So there was still some iteration back and forth to make sure that Dash was always in the right place in screen, and the camera animation wasn't too unrealistic. But yeah, it was a really neat kind of collaboration between animation, layout, and sets too, to make sure that there weren't any stalactites or stalagmites in the way of the performance. We could set dress things, where they needed to be so that they didn't interfere with the action. Yeah, it was kind of a cool cyclical iteration cycle with 3 or 4 departments.
Which techniques would you use to have like a very neat, very well-prepared reference? If you're doing, for example, an acting piece, how do you approach it?
I approach reference a little differently for everything I work on. Sometimes I use video reference, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I do all just thumbnails on paper. Sometimes I'll do the thumbnails right in the computer and maybe even time them out, sort of like a rough sketch blocking. Sometimes I'll just start animating straight away in the computer because I already have a really clear idea of what I want to do. It depends on the kind of shot and the mood I'm in and how far along in production we are and how fast things are moving. But I generally, if I can, if the schedule allows, I like to take a week just to do my planning and my research before I touch anything in the computer. Just to, try to vet through as many ideas as I can and find the best ideas. And sometimes that involves video reference and sometimes it doesn't.
And how much do you copy the reference? Are you very faithful to it, or do you just use it for blocking?
I use my video reference pretty loosely. I try really hard never to just copy my reference verbatim, because I just don't think the characters in the films I work on would move like me. They're not the same body type as me, they're not the same weight, they're not the same person. I'm not good enough of an actor in front of the camera to really transform myself physically, like a lot of really well-trained actors can do. So I use video reference more just for general ideas and timing, what gesture happens where, and probably a lot for eye animation, like, where exactly is an eye dart landing or a blink. Those things I may, get pretty close to frame by frame as far as when those things happen and how long they last. Eye animation I do find translates pretty well from video reference, but the greater physicality of the character and the gestures, that's more of a loose inspiration. One thing that I find, and this is kind of a tip for your viewers, is if I'm ever recording video reference to go along with a piece of pre-recorded dialogue, a lot of times I have trouble keeping up with the dialogue. Maybe the dialogue is speaking very fast, or I just feel like I'm constantly rushing myself to try to keep up with that timing. And that doesn't lead to an authentic performance. So one little trick that I'll do is I will play back the audio that I have at a slower speed, say 75%. And that's slow enough where I feel like I can relax a little bit, take my time, kind of explore the performance and still keep up with the timing of the vocal performance. And then once I do that, I've got my video footage. I can take that into an editor, and I can speed it back up 125%. And now my performance will match with the dialogue at the original speed, which is great because it means my performance moves a little bit faster, and animated performances tend to move a little bit faster than real life anyway, so it gives it a little bit extra snappiness, a little bit of extra life to it. So I find that works pretty well if you're using video reference.
Yeah, that's very clever. Thank you.
Yeah, there are definitely times when video reference just doesn't make sense. On Wall-E, I didn't want anything about him to feel like a person in a robot suit, so I tried to invent all of his poses strictly based on what he could actually do as a robot. Cars, for the most part, I wouldn't use video reference. Sometimes I would just shoot video reference from the neck up and treat like my head as the car, and sometimes that would be useful. But other times, like a character that's really broad, like Fear, again, I didn't want to be too tied to what I could actually do with my body. I wanted more just like the feeling of my body. So I might act something out in front of a mirror, just to get the feeling of it, but I wouldn't video reference it because I don't want to be tempted to just follow the video reference. Another thing I'll do is sometimes, because maybe I do shoot video reference and I don't like the performance that I come up with, or I feel like I'm just doing the same thing over and over again and I don't want my characters to just look like me, I'll ask somebody else to act out my scene for me, and then I'll record them doing that. And that can lead to some really new, fresh takes on how to approach the shot. For example, on Toy Story 4, I had some really emotional shots of Gabby Gabby towards the end of the film. And I didn't really want to try to just imitate what I thought my impression of, a little girl who had been hurt, what would that performance be like? I wasn't comfortable doing that myself. I was too worried I would get into the realm of cliche or being hammy. So instead I asked one of my female co-workers to act it out for me. And she came up with some really cool, authentic stuff, really vulnerable performance that I thought, I would never get that out of myself. And there were ideas in there that I'd never considered that I think really made the performance a lot richer.
No doubt. I want to ask you something. You're not a recruiter. Let's start there. But I do want to ask you if you have any tips or tricks to enter PIXAR. What would you recommend?
Sure. As you mentioned, I am not a recruiter, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. But the first thing I would want to focus on is that getting into PIXAR doesn't mean being an animator necessarily. I mean, yeah, animation is the biggest department there. There's almost 150 of us, and maybe it's the part that gets the most attention because animation's in the name of the studio. But there are a lot of other jobs at PIXAR to be done as well. There's many different departments, both in production and out of production. There are support departments, so whether, you want to work in art or story or visual effects or, camera and staging, or editorial, or if you're more on the computer side, you want to be a technical director, like working on shading or rendering. There are so many opportunities at PIXAR for all different types of skill sets. So there's a lot of different ways in. That said, as you can imagine, there's a lot of competition to get in and not a whole lot of turnover. People tend to stay a long time. So it's very challenging to get in. On the animation side, I can speak to more specifically. I feel like a lot of our new hires come from the intern program. We have a summer animation internship that we run every summer. This summer, it's being run remotely, of course, because of shelter in place, which is unfortunate, but it's better than nothing. So we tend to end up at the end of each internship, asking a few of the interns to stay. If there's a need for them in production, they can come on as a fixed animator or a crowds animator and kind of work their way up into a full-fledged animator. So that's one pretty consistent path. Beyond that, occasionally we're on the lookout for more experienced animators, so animators who do have feature film experience at another studio. That's a longer route to getting into PIXAR, kind of paying your dues at other studios, but that's another source that we do hire from. Put something of yourself in there and show us who you are. That's the kind of stuff that's really exciting for us to see when we're going through demo reels and trying to decide who we might be bringing aboard next.
Now, you and I have talked before about the tools and the techniques we use for work. Could you share some of yours with the audience?
Sure. I'm not going to really talk about the tools we use at PIXAR because it's all proprietary animation. It's our Presto system, which is not available outside of Presto, but it's amazing, I can tell you that. But you know what, I want to talk about stuff that your viewers don't have access to. So when I'm not animating in Presto, when I'm animating in Maya, say for personal work or doing a teaching demo, because I teach a lot.
On a side note, make sure to check Animation Collaborative. That's where Victor Navone teaches, as well as many other very talented animators that we're actually going to have on the Worldspace. So check it out. Their quality is amazing. Okay, sorry for the interruption.
I rely very heavily on the Animbot software, which is a suite of animation tools created for Maya, which is fantastic, makes animating a lot more fun and easy in Maya. And I rely a lot on the website syncsketch.com, which is great for doing 2D annotation or sketches over my own work or over student work. It's free to use, really user-friendly, really powerful. So I use those two things extensively. Beyond specific tools that I use, I also have a lot of just different workflows that I use. I'm not strictly pose to pose or strictly layered or strictly stepped keys or strictly splines. I mix and match depending on what I think the shot needs or what's interesting to me at the time. And I think it's good for all animators to have a couple different workflows that they can work with. Just in case one workflow doesn't work out for you in a given situation, you can fall back on a different kind of workflow.
Thank you so much for your time. You are such a wonderful and talented person. Keep glowing and keep sharing your expertise and your charisma. It was an honor to have you in the show today. Thank you so much.
And thank you again, Ilse. It was really fun. Thanks again for your kind words. It was a really fun experience for me, and hopefully your viewers got something useful out of it too.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching, everybody.
That was Victor Navone, everyone. I want to give a big shout out to Bernard Hawks, who is doing an amazing job in SyncSketch. It's used all around the industry. I will leave you a link in the description down below if you want to check it out. Also, don't forget, Trikingo is a site where you can download many different tools and tutorials. If you are an animator, if you want to learn scripting, if you want to even learn how to make your own video game, it doesn't matter if you're highly experienced or you're new to the industry. There is content for all kinds of CG artists. You can see these tools being used over and over again in the pipelines of the most important studios around the world. My subscribers and I get a 20% discount in any purchase. There's even free stuff to play around with. I will leave you guys a link in the description down below. Make sure to check it out. For a more detailed conversation with me and for exclusive content like asking questions, having Zoom meetings with me, getting personal animation tutorials and more, just check out my Patreon. I will leave you a link in the description down below. For each dollar I receive, a percentage will serve to rescue stray dogs and cats. And you will unlock new content every week, so please check it out. Help me, help the channel, and become a VIP Worldspacer. If you want to keep receiving this content, please make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, like this video, and let me know in the comments what you learned, what you think, your opinion, anything you want to tell me. You know I read every single one and answer every single one of them. So thank you so much for watching and keep making art, you beautiful artist. Ciao.